we can make a start. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband. I'm the Chairman of the committee. To my right, I'm joined by my fellow councillors, and we will be making the decisions on the application in front of us this evening. My left around the table, I'm joined by officers. They will be presenting the report and offering us advice as we go through the evening. And the officer team is led by Amanda Reid, sitting on my immediate left. So, do we have any apologies for absence?
No.
No. Are there any declarations of interest? Are there any other declarations? No. Okay, very good. So in that case, I think we can move straight to the matter in hand, which is the application in Latimer Road. And I think Gabby Wesley, Gabby, you're going to introduce this. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to draw members' attention to the committee addendum report, which includes further objections from residents, a supporting document from the applicant, and a consultative response provided by Network Rail. I'd also like to provide a verbal update in that additional representations, including comments from the MP for Ealing Central and Acton, which included further representations from objectors, has been submitted. These comments were received past the deadline for the addendum report, so have not been included in the packs, but we have briefly reviewed the content, and from an initial look, these concerns have been covered in the officer's report. This is an application for Planning Permission for the demolition of an existing industrial unit and its replacement with a 5-storey building, including flexible commercial Class E floor space and 7 new residential units. The site is comprised of a single-storey industrial building, which is located on the eastern side of Latimer Road and is identified in red on the site location plan. The site is within the Latimer Road employment zone and is situated in the St Vincent Woodlands neighbourhood area. To the rear of the site is the Hammersmith and Fulham boundary and a railway line. The site is not within a conservation area, but is within the setting of the adjacent Oxford Gardens conservation area. It's important for members to note that the site is identified as an area for regeneration within the St Vincent and Woodlands neighbourhood plan. This slide shows an aerial image which members may find useful, and shows a variety of building heights to the west in the Hammersmith and Fulham borough, and the location of the railway and the Westway in relation to the application site. Members will note the single-storey, low-rise industrial units which the site forms a part of along the Latimer Industrial Estate. At the end of the stretch of warehouses, there is implemented development at Unit 1, Latimer Road. I've included a photograph of this development later in the presentation. This slide shows some existing site photographs. To the right hand of the slide, there is a photograph for members to see of the existing unit. To the left-hand side, this shows the wider context of the street and looking along Latimer Industrial Estate, and shows the separation distances to neighbouring properties across the street. This slide shows a photograph looking north up Latimer Road with the site identified by the arrow. And this slide shows a photograph of the site when viewed from Latimer Place. This slide shows some more photographs down the street along with the taller buildings in the background. And these are some more photographs of the view south down Latimer Industrial Estate. And this slide shows the redeveloped unit at number 1, which is further down the street. This slide shows the existing floor plan of the existing unit, which is currently comprised of commercial space with units 8 and 10 either side. And this slide shows the existing front and side elevations of the building, and this is the building which would be demolished and redeveloped. This slide shows the proposed front elevation, which includes the replacement 5-storey building. The building would be approximately 17.7 metres in height and would be designed to match the height of the consented development at number 10 next door. The development includes commercial Class E space at both the ground and first floor levels, along with 7 residential units at the second, third and fourth floors of the building. The building would include glazing for the windows and doors, balustrades for the balconies throughout the building, and would be designed in a buff-coloured brick with glazed brickwork. The details of the materials and railings are recommended to be secured by conditions 4 and 5. This slide shows the proposed rear elevation and also shows the height in relation to the consented development at number 10. This slide shows the proposed section of the building, which shows the recessed nature of the proposed development and the setbacks and the inclusion of the balconies at the upper floor levels of the building. This slide shows a map of the building heights within the area, which members may find helpful. This appraisal shows the industrial units in the industrial estate being single story in height, sort of outlined in the grey on the key. And with Victorian terraces opposite, which include residential flats and houses, and then a mixed character of commercial uses further along the street. As such, this map shows that there is a mix within building heights in this particular area. I've included this slide as well to show the proposed land uses which members may also find helpful, including the housing mix for the 7 new units. As proposed, there would be an uplift in approximately 31 square metres in office space. The next few slides show some visuals which members may find useful. The visuals also include the neighbouring consented scheme at 10 as part of the wider context. This is another visual which shows the depth of the balconies and the recessed nature of the upper floors. There's another visual taken looking down south of Hampton Industrial Estate. So turning to the planning balance, the creation of 7 new homes would be a welcome contribution to the borough's housing stock, with the presumption in favour of development in the NPPF applying. The proposals would include approximately 31 square metres of uplift in office space within the employment zone. Turning to design and heritage, officers are of the view that the scheme provides a high standard of amenity in a building of an appropriate scale, location and massing. The proposed demolition of the building and redevelopment of the site to create a 5-storey building would offer meaningful sustainability benefits along with a high quality design. With regards to living conditions, which is a key issue, the application is supported by a comprehensive daylight and sunlight assessment, which demonstrates the losses identified would not be so harmful as to justify refusal of planning permission on this basis. Due to the increased height, scale and massing of the proposed building, the scheme has potential to impact properties opposite with regards to outlook, but the careful design and separation distances responds to the site sensitivities and ensures that there will be no harmful sensing enclosure. This is also the case for overlooking, with offset windows and careful balcony designs offsetting impact and privacy for nearby neighbours. In terms of highways and transport, subject to the recommended conditions in a legal agreement ensuring that the proposed units would be parking permit free, the proposals would also be acceptable. Officer's opinion is that the application should be approved subject to the recommended conditions and the completion of the legal agreement for the reasons set out in the supporting report. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Steve. So we have speakers this evening for this. Can I first ask there are a number of people who are objectors. If you'd like to come, I think Douglas, if you oh, you sit there. Okay, so if you could come forward and sit at the chairs here, please. Thank you for coming along. I think we've agreed that between you, you've got up to 6 minutes shared between you. So I don't know, I'd like to do this. Who's going to start? What order are you going to go? So you're going to start.
You.
Very good. All right.
Do you know how many you're going to take?
Good. So please go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I'm angry, but furious, because what this proposal represents is not just overdevelopment, it's direct, personal and unprovoked attack on my home, my family and the life we've quietly built for over a decade. And the most galling part, not a single person involved in this enormous development has had the decency to contact me, not once. We want to build something that will rip away our light, destroy our privacy, power over our lives, and don't even knock on my door. Let me tell you what's at stake here. This is our home. My children grew up here. They study in their bedrooms where natural light streams in through their windows, light we've cherished for years. We spend time together on our roof garden, which is our sacred space, where we're not overlooked, and where we have privacy and where we feel safe, and it's our sanctuary. And now we're being told that a huge, brutal building with terraces facing directly onto our windows is going to be shoved meters away from us. So close, it will feel like it's sitting on our front doorstep. You claim that the light loss is acceptable. Acceptable to whom? The light loss quoted for my personal home is 36% reduction in daylight to my children's bedroom. Do you have any idea what that means for a real family, for a child trying to do homework after school, for people trying to live in their home without feeling like they're in a cave? You say it's fine because my room is deep, and you say I'll still get light from the back. You've no idea what you're talking about. You've guessed everything, our layout, our windows, our lives, without even having the courtesy to ask us. And worse, the entire light study is flawed. It's based on the current footprint of the building, not where it's actually going to be built. The real structure will be pushed 2.5 meters forward, dramatically closer to our home, and that changes everything and means more shadow, more enclosure, and more loss. The report also ignores the impact of winter, focusing on one day in spring, just one day. What about long winter months? What about the days we already struggle for sunlight and now we're going to have that taken away? And this isn't about just Unit 9. It's Unit 10, as we've seen up there, Unit 11, one after the other, like a row of giants looming over our homes. And if all of them are allowed up at 8 meters from a forward shifted footprint without proper gaps, then let's stop please pretending. Our homes will be in darkness, and the 36% means nothing. Our windows will face a wall and we'll have the sky stolen from us. You want to do all of this without a single attempt to soften the blow. No reduced height, no step back floors, no effort to mitigate harm, just concrete, shadow, and silence. And here we are, families, residents, human beings. This is wrong, it's aggressive, it's inconsiderate, and it flies in the face of everything that our community stands for. You're not just taking our light and privacy, you're taking our dignity and our safety, and you're telling us in no uncertain terms that we don't actually matter. Well, we do matter, and our voices are going to be heard. And if this development goes ahead in its current form, it will not go quietly. Please, can you see past the cold reports and technical language and see what is truly happening here? We are being boxed in, cut off, ignored, violated, and I won't let this happen to my family without a fight.
Thank you very much. We've got nearly 2 minutes left for you to share. So please, who'd like to go on?
I'll make it quick. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight the St Quintins and Woodlands Neighbourhood Forum Policy LR5. A legally adopted policy is not created or properly assessed as part of the officer's report and opens the council up for judicial review. It carries full legal weight under Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, and yet its full wording has not been presented in the officer's report nor in the committee addendum. I respectfully ask the committee to defer the application until the STKW policy LR5 is properly assessed against what is being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bergen, you know, I'm 50A Iron Road, directly behind this particular property. We're facing a full mass of 5 stories, and if you include the infrastructure on the top, it's 6 stories. And there's no recessed balconies, and actually most of the balconies are on the rear of the property. That's affecting our privacy, as well as great shade over our lovely green area that we've been nurturing for over 2 decades alongside the track, the entire length of Line and Rose Street. We think this contravenes a number of clauses within your design code, which I won't reference now for time reasons. But I would also like to raise the issue of noise. We already, just preparing for this meeting and listening to your previous meeting on one of the other units, I was unable to hear on full volume the meeting proceed because of the train noise outside of my window. Add to that a sheer concrete face opposite me, the noise will be unbearable. And to add to that, I know you covered the issue about the electric lines and this building being way too close to be safe to the electric lines. But I think we need to look at that, if anything, just to be occupants of the building itself. From a perspective of design, I think looking at the design of the building,
just briefly,
30 seconds,
Yeah.
design of the building versus both the new builds that are being acted now, as well as the Edwardian and Georgian properties that exist on both sides of on Iron Road and Latimer Road. It's not in keeping with the character. And lastly, the front of my house facing the tall building that you saw in the aerial image there in Imperial College. We shut our windows because of the noise and the ventilation of those buildings.
Yeah.
We're now going to have to shut the windows in the back of our property because of this building. But
Thanks.
unfortunately, I actually.
the noise issue, yes. Thank you very much indeed. If you stay there, and I think now we've got representatives of the applicant, haven't we? So if you'd like to come forward, maybe if there are seats across here, perhaps if you can take those and introduce yourselves. I don't know how you would like to this. So you actually have the same amount of time, which is actually nearly 7 minutes. So please go ahead when you're ready. So you are, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Patrick Epson, and I'm Chief Executive of Rat Place, the applicant behind this proposal for the redevelopment of Unit 9 Latimer Road. Rat Place is proud to bring forward a high-quality mixed-use scheme that is confirmed in the officer's report, fully complies with the local plan and Latimer Road design code that was explicitly developed to secure the type of regeneration on Latimer Road that our scheme proposes. It also reflects our ongoing commitment to sustainable, thoughtful developments. We're pleased that this application comes before you with a recommendation for approval from planning officers, recognising both the design quality and the positive impact it will have on the area. We are not speculative developers. Rat Place is a long-term investor with a strong track record of delivering projects that respect and enrich their local context. This development is no exception. It responds directly to the borough's priorities for housing, employment and placemaking, and forms part of the wider regeneration of the Latimer Road industrial estate as set out in RBKC's local plan and the St Quentin and Woodlands neighbourhood plan. Currently, Unit 9 is a single-storey warehouse that adds little to the local streetscape or community. Our proposal will replace it with a building that introduces 374 square metres of flexible Class E commercial space and 7 much-needed new homes. All homes have private outdoor space and will include a mix of 1-, 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, catering to a broad range of those needs. These homes will contribute to meeting RBKC's housing targets, and as officers have rightly noted, they offer a high standard of amenity in a building of appropriate scale and massing. We've taken great care to ensure the design sits comfortably within its surroundings. The building height matches that of the consented scheme at neighbouring Unit 10, creating a coherent roof line that supports the emerging character of Latimer Road, and it introduces setbacks from the 3rd floor up. Furthermore, the site sits directly opposite a cul-de-sac and 2 commercial premises, further limiting any possible impact of the proposal on existing dwellings. Designed by Bureau de Change, an award-winning architectural practice, our scheme references the area's historical character, incorporating bay windows that are reminiscent of old shop fronts and brickwork that complements the neighbouring context. We've also ensured the commercial space plays an active role in supporting the local economy. These flexible units will provide valuable workspace within the employment zone, encouraging day-long activity and job creation, and helping to secure the long-term success of Latimer Road as a thriving mixed-use street. Proposals such as this are crucial if the borough and the local community are to truly benefit from the long-awaited East-West Railway underpass proposed at the southern end of the street. Sustainability is central to our approach. The scheme is entirely car-free, encourages walking and cycling, and includes a range of energy-efficient features such as air source heat pumps, high-performance glazing, and green roofs. We are also proposing new planting and landscaping to the front of the building, and have agreed to contributions towards new tree planting on the street as part of the Section 106 agreement. These elements reduce emissions, promote biodiversity, and deliver long-term environmental benefits in line with both local and London-wide policy. This proposal has been shaped through meaningful engagement. We've held meetings with local ward councillors, consulted community groups, and hosted a public exhibition. Feedback from these sessions has led to revisions to massing and materiality and course of measure, demonstrating our commitment to listening and responding to the community. This is a sensitive, well-considered redevelopment that turns an underused site into something far more beneficial, a place to live, work, and contribute to the life of North Kensington. It supports the council's aspirations for the area and embodies a balance of heritage, innovation, and social value. We hope you will support this proposal and allow us to bring this project to life for the benefit of both current and future residents of RBKC. Thank you.
Chair, if I may, my name is Luke Emerson. I'm agent for the applicant. I just wanted to pick up on a comment raised by the objectors on daylight sunlight. I'm sure you're all very well versed in the nature of daylight sunlight settings, but there is a test, and the test is the BRE guidance, and the scheme is fully compliant with BRE guidance. The proposed scheme has been properly assessed in terms of the footprint of the proposed scheme. 3D modelling means that they are super accurate. So there's no question of where that footprint of the proposed building is and the impact. That's all been properly assessed. And then just finally on the point in terms of the standard requirement to undertake a winter and summer solstice assessment, 31st of March and the 21st of June. And those are the dates that we are required to assess, and those are in there, and that's the assessment that's been provided. So it is fully compliant in terms of daylight and sun. I just wanted to be clear on that point for you. Thank you.
Thank you. So colleagues, our chance to answer questions. We'd like to go first on this.
Okay. Yeah, my question was just whether you could provide a bit more detail about the LR5 policy in St Quintin's neighbourhood plan.
Sure.
Why this contradicts.
Yeah, so I had some actually. So the LR5 carries more legal weight than the design code, which is SPD level guidance, not an adopted policy. It also overrides the RBKC 2024 local plan because there is no conflicting local plan policy in the building heights for Latimer Road, which LR5 sets out. And also, we need to note that the failure to give due weight to LR5 or to assess the proposal against its specific criteria, that will account to procedural flaws in the decision making.
I can ask officers later, but I wonder if you could provide a bit more detail about LR5. But yeah, I'll ask later. Thank you.
We'll follow that up.
So I'll ask a few questions, please.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. And I wanted to ask firstly about the consultation which you talked about in your presentation, because we've heard from at least one of the objectors that they weren't consulted. So can you tell us what you did, what you went through, why this very first neighbour doesn't feel included in that consultation? And then perhaps you can tell us, you mentioned there were changes made to the scheme because of the consultation, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about those as well.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we carried out a fairly comprehensive engagement. We applied over 1,000 addresses. First of all, to invite them to look at our online website, which details the proposal for submission. It also included a survey that people could do to voice their opinions. We had 1,100 website views with 153 unique visitors and 17 responses to the online survey. We then flied again, same addresses to let people know that we were holding public exhibition, which we did, I think, 2 months before we submitted the application. We had, I think it was between 1 and 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. We had boards up describing the scheme. We were there to answer questions. We had 13 attendees to that. And yeah, I think it was for this scale of the scheme, I think it was our engagement was appropriate. I'm not sure why you wouldn't have received a flyer.
Well, in a moment, perhaps I'll ask you, but maybe we'll finish here first. And you talked about the changes that you made as a result of that consultation. So what was the feedback that you got and what were the changes that you made?
Well, first of all, we've had a lot of positive feedback. And then the changes we made were to the massing. We reduced massing from the 3rd floor up rather than the 4th floor and 5th. We recessed balconies and we changed proposed colour of the brickwork. I think, yeah, I'm sure there's.
I guess the thing that sort of struck me about this was, I mean, this is a designated area of, you know, that we want development here. We all agreed that. I think the neighbourhood forum would probably agree that. So it just feels, well, I'm just wondering why they're so against the scheme that you've put forward, and I wondered whether you might have some thoughts about why. I mean, I've read their objection, but why do you think they're so opposed to what you're doing, given that we should all, in theory, be in favour of this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we think this is a great proposal and totally appropriate for the street. We understand there has been opposition. Yeah, I guess that's five stories. I think, but you know, I think this. Sorry to interrupt, but I think this inevitability of question change, and the area has been, you know, a single story from the outlook on one side. It's a kind of single, maximum 2-story outlook. So the change is my own personal view, but the change is the reason why there is the level of objection that's been received. It's how this will come forward in the change, but it is all something that was based on the planning policy that was developed by the authority to regenerate an area, to deliver positive regeneration and support policies and bring all this good stuff forward. I think it's also worth noting that Unit 1 received a similar amount of objection when it was going through planning. And now that's referenced as a positive contribution in a number of the objections.
Doesn't have 5 stories though.
No, it's a different location, and it probably should have 5 stories, but it is a different location. And I don't think you can stand there and say it's negatively impacted the street at all. And it did have the same level of opposition also.
So just going back to this, the neighbourhood forum, and we have a representative here, so I'm sure we can ask him as well. But you had meetings with them and you engaged with them. What did they tell you about? I mean, they've written quite a long objection, and I agree with you. People don't like change. I think that's our experience on the planning committee. But here we've all agreed that this is an area that could have some positive change. And actually, many of the objections start with I don't disagree with development. I don't disagree with investment in the area. So it's not a place where people are opposed to change, as we can see in some other parts of the borough, and I completely recognise what you're saying. So when you met with the forum, what did they say to you?
Well, I mean,
Henry.
Yeah, exactly.
13 people, let's be clear. If you met 13 people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's
They represent the neighbourhood. I mean, they're local people. So what did they say?
Well, as you said, they wanted something to happen there. They're encouraging development. We showed them the scheme. They were actually supportive. And to be honest, we didn't receive any of their the objections that they wrote in their letter when we met, and we didn't have any follow-up comments from them throughout the consultation process. So, yeah.
Okay. And just one last question before you objectors. I just wanted to ask about balconies, because looking at the scheme, there are a lot of balconies on the building, and they do overlook, you know, the existing buildings on the other side of the street. So again, how did you think about the treatment of those? And I mean, are you expecting that people would use them 24 hours a day? I mean, like it's okay. So
yeah, I mean they're really limited in size, most of them, and it's worth noting that directly opposite the site is a cul-de-sac and a pub and a commercial unit. There are flats above, so there is no direct overlooking, and there's quite a significant gap. The street is pretty wide. I think it's 24 meters from one side to the other, and from the rear, the balconies are set within the First Village building. Again, that restricts overlooking. But yeah, they're not oversized balconies, and there is a significant gap between properties opposite, and there's no direct lines of sight overlooking.
Thank you. So to ask you similar questions about the consultation, you know, you said in your presentation that you didn't feel that you've been spoken to or considered. Or just tell us a little bit about any engagement you've had with this process or any feedback you've given.
No engagement whatsoever. However, my building was directly mentioned as losing to the first floor bedroom 36% of light. When we put the mock-up there, we need to also bear in mind Unit 10. And the mass of Unit 10 is absolutely enormous. And I would like to know whether it would still come at 36% loss without gaps, as shown and as presented, you know, to the committee. There is not a chance. It would be about 70% loss.
You mean the cumulative effect?
100%.
Sorry, that is how we model
The
it.
site of Unit 10 is probably double the footprint. It is the largest of the units on Latimer Road. It is double the footprint, which currently has centred the low-level industrial unit, which is working, and equally either side, almost at the same footprint, parking bays, which are used for all the deliveries of the commerce that's going on there. So if one puts that into perspective, and the other thing is that the commercial side alone would now reach opposite buildings, the pub, my building, just shy of 9 meters. This is an 18-meter building. And so will the other be 18 meters in a wall, with my roof garden, which is where my family spend time. And we will be overlooked. We have all our privacy there now. And this is remarkable. And the overlooking will be directly into our homes and towering over us. Now, when we at the very beginning were talking about the design code and what was workable, one of the things that really needed considering was all the buildings, because there are 14 units, they cannot be considered in isolation, because the cumulative impact of one and another is enormous on us. We have to look at gaps, heights, setbacks, and we were told at the very start of any consultations, when there are ideas of any development, given that they're all in the hands of individual owners, and it's not one development, that And because of the charming nature, bearing in mind that Latimer Road is a conservation area to the other side, and we're very proud of that, and proud of our, creatives that live on the street. We were told that nothing would not meet height from opposite sides. We start with small Victorian cottages. Some moves up slightly, some moves down. And we were always told from the start this wouldn't. So how are we here now where my building, a single unit, may be reasonably tall at 9, most of them fall around 7, some of them 6 as the road goes on in the conservation area. How are we now talking about buildings that are reaching 18 meters in a wall? And this is not from a street that doesn't welcome change and growth and otherwise, but we also welcome our community, not overdevelopment.
Thank you.
Sorry to.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Well, very quickly add, have the developers responded at all to the issues raised by Einem Road? Because it's all well and good saying you've reset the balconies, you've set back the 5th floor. We're looking at a sheer cliff face, and once you've finished your work, your peers alongside you, the other developers, there'll be a corridor of concrete right along our back garden, and we have been nurturing that area. We've brought up multiple generations of children through it, and our children will own those houses and hopefully bring up their children there. And you can sit here and tell me 17.7 meters is perfectly admissible in this context. It's just poorly.
So just to say, Spain, sorry to be awkward, but you're not allowed to cross-question one another. But I think it's a perfectly sensible question. So, Anne, would you like to? I think Councillor Siren would like to pose that question to the applicants. Sorry about that. It sounds all a bit funny, but the way we have to do it.
Well, I think the question is, have you considered the impact of the height of your new building, and especially in the context of the next door neighbour, on the objectors' living conditions?
Yeah, I suppose 2 points. One, just to be very clear that daylight sunlight assessment statutory requirement to do a cumulative assessment. So any assessment would have included Unit 10 in that assessment.
Because it already has permission,
Because it
or
already has permission. Yeah, you have to include all consenting schemes, and so number 10 sat in that model, so it's very clear. In terms of the rear, I mean, to an extent, it's a question for the council, because the council established a design code for the extent of Latimer Road, setting height parameters, scale parameters, and that was developed in full knowledge of the local area, where conservation areas are, where the residents live behind, on the other side of the railway line, admittedly. And so all we are doing is developing a scheme that sits within the compliance box, let's call it, of the design code. We're not making up the rules here. We're not challenging. We are a scheme that sits comfortably within all of the guidance that sits in all of the different layers of policy that's being presented, and that's the way we've worked with your officers and developed this scheme. We're not challenging, we're not going above heights that can't be admitted, it's established.
But there was some discussion about that. I mean, as you'll have probably read the objections, that it's not in line with the design code and it's not in line with policy at R5. So,
Well,
I mean, we will have a discussion, I'm sure, with the officers, but there's a difference of opinion here about whether it is compliance.
Yeah, the design code, maybe it's an error in the design code. The design code sets a maximum height of the building, but it only refers to when that building is 4 stories high. It doesn't, the design code allows, in circumstances such as our site, to be a 5th story. But the code doesn't then follow through to say, if there is a 5th story, there must be a maximum height of X. So, but you know, the principle of a 5-story building is acceptable in the code.
But I'm sure we'll explore that a bit more.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry, now there's a point about LR5 you mentioned. Sorry, LR5. My view on LR5 is that the neighbourhood plan has to be consistent with the local plan. Has to be. They can't be approved without there being consistency across. The local plan remains the principal document under which applications are approved. When you read what's in LR5, it talks about the same principles that are in across all of the documents in terms of height, privacy, overlooking, impact, all of those kind of things, which are and have been fully assessed through policy assessments by officers in the report.
Really sentence about Unit 11, just to respond to that. One sentence. The objection, Unit 11 was refused and dismissed. It's a 4-story building with a setback 5th floor, quote unquote. Dismissed for being overly dominant and inappropriate for this location. Those materials are unacceptable, and unnecessary overbearing structure would harmfully increase the sense of enclosure within properties on the street of ease.
We can possibly pursue that with officers, but Toby, did you want to ask something, and then I'll come to Aaron?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. First of the objectives, slightly more question. What height and number of floors would you be happy with, and do you have any ideas of that could have been changed to allow for something more acceptable?
So the Lateral Road Design Code SPD says preference for 3 floors. That's not that 4. I'd be perfectly happy with that, so long as you kept the heights that the design code suggests for each floor. Now, there is an argument to say going up to 4 floors in certain conditions, but when you think about all the units together, I'm sorry, that you cannot possibly accept that. Now, what would take me to 5 floors plus the infrastructure, ventilation, etc. at the top, I'm sorry, no one in their right mind, if they know that area, would accept it.
I think that another objector want to answer that.
I think probably along the same lines, as we've said, we're not against redevelopment for those units, and it's not all of them, for those that want to, but it can't be overbearing. And I think one of the big issues that you have is massing as well, gaps and footprint, because these developments are taking up enormous amounts of space. And I think the most important thing to point out here is that somewhere in this plan, at huge mass, the commercial side of the units will be taller than most buildings on the street. And there is no necessity for this. And thereafter comes the residential sections, which is then what towers over. So there is a difficulty there in the first instance, times 14 and the impact. So it has to be very, very carefully done with regard to gaps in between some forefront space, which is already in a direct line as it stands right now, keeping the depth between the buildings. If we're talking about 14 buildings, maybe some green space to the front, and that there should be gaps to cut up so it's not so imposing. Stories is really misleading, really misleading. My home is 3 stories. 2 stories of commercial for unit 10 meets my building height. So it's not, the very wording of stories is incredibly misleading. There's 2-story cottages that are at 6, meters.
Okay, thank you.
The tallest building on the street is the pub, which is next door to me and myself, of single dwellings. So
Yeah.
that's under 9.
Yes, thank you. Can I just thank
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
For the applicants, I mean, a couple of things which I'm just trying to condense a little bit and just make it a little bit clearer for my own understanding. So, firstly, as I understand it, these are going to be questions for officers as well. As far as I understand it, the design code says there shouldn't be balconies on the primary frontage. That's what I think it says in the design. I'm going to check this with the officers. So do you have anything to say?
I think that's correct, but yeah, please check with the officers. But
okay, I'll
Yeah.
have to extend.
and I,
Yes, well, there's a difference of opinion, so we'll
okay, I don't think so. And obviously, Unit 10 has balconies at the front. Unit 1,
Oh, we're
Unit
not
1
talking about
does.
Unit 10. We are encouraged to consider each case in terms, but and also just to be clear in terms of compliance with daylight, we're talking about the difference between the advice we get from the BRE document and with the Mayor of London. So we're basically talking about a difference of 20 to 14% is acceptable. Am I understanding that right? So it would fall short of the BRE guidelines, but it's considered acceptable under the Mayor of London guidelines, talking about in the city context. That's all. Am I right in thinking that it's one and not the other?
To an extent, but it's led by BRE. The London plan and the mayor doesn't determine daylight sunlight levels, acceptable daylight sunlight levels. The BRE guidance suggests 20%.
Yes.
But then that's a strange situation, but it's based in a kind of greenfield assessment of development of the Chilterns. And when you build it into a urban location, that's why there is then the ability to the BRE says up to they grade it upwards up to 40%. It's not the London plan. The mayor is saying actually we need to densify and therefore we need to accept that retained levels of light is important. And if that stays within the teens, which we more than achieve, then that's an acceptable level.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I've learned anything from the committees, that there's a ton of different guidance from different places that I'm trying to always balance. Okay, so my last question, if you don't mind, Chair, is it's a little bit more abstract, it's also for the applicants. So as often kind of supersedes everything else, there are homes being created. But I'm just kind of curious what kind of homes, and I know this is a little bit more the spirit of the local plan than the letter of the local plan, but it means something to me. What kind of homes, who are they going to be for? My view is that we need a certain type of homes for certain people who basically can't live here, can't afford to live in a place they grew up. I don't say, I don't think there's an affordable homes, anything like that. So can you just speak a little bit about that? What sort of, well, just really just say whatever you like about it, but I'd just like to get an idea.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it's going to be a mix of 1, 2, and 3 beds. And we're a developer that doesn't. We're not super prime developers. We've got no intention of being super prime developers. We understand the local market. We know it's not Notting Hill super prime. We know it's not even one street over, Highlever Road, which could be considered Notting Hill super prime. So no, these are targeted at these are mid-level homes. We see our target market as young professionals, young families. But yeah, we're not trying to shoot the lights out with values or anything. We're not. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks. I mean, I appreciate it's difficult to be very, decisive in your answer. That's it now for Chair.
Good, thank you very much, Tilly. Actually, I'd like to ask about these balconies at the front of the property that are proposed. They do. I mean, the angles are quite oblique, but obviously they do create lines of sight across the road. Do the balconies really come from essentially our planning policies, it may be the Mayor of London or that new homes are supposed to have outside space, and that's what drives it. Because I mean, well, if we walked a few minutes away from here, we see all sorts of mansion blocks that are very desirable places to live that have no, balconies stuck on the front of them going up the building. Are you essentially here? You are proposing something because you've been told that that's what it is that you're expected to provide.
Well, you are expected to provide outdoor space, and no, I mean, I would much prefer to live in a place that has outside space. Yeah, it's a nice thing to have. And they're not, as I said, they're not oversized. And I know, especially post-COVID, people really, really want outside space. So it is important to provide.
Right. So the residential units, which are the third, fourth, fifth floors, they all have all of the face to the front of the building. They all have a smallish balcony of some kind. Yeah. Right. And tell me the office accommodation. Simply, I mean, it's been referenced that the floor to ceiling height of the offices at the ground and first floor they're quite high by residential standards, but there are no actual balconies there. Is that right? I just have to look at the CGI.
I think I don't have the design code in front of me, but I'm very confident that there is, because it is a commercial use and because the idea of the code was actually to try and introduce light industrial, make space, that kind of thing, that actually there is a minimum ceiling height, floor to ceiling height, that they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a kind of standard office height that would then easily in the future be converted into residential. It's designed to be more flexible workspace.
I understand that. Okay, thank you for that. Aaron, did you want to amend finally, Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. Just moving on to the Chairman's question about the balconies. How many units rear of the property do you have balconies at? And which floor are they to? And it's not clear on the other side.
I think it's 34.
Third.
Yeah.
And all the property.
So it's one number,
please. You've got 7.
Yeah, so that would be 4 units, I think. Is it 5? Sorry,
I just wonder whether your officer could bring up the. Yeah. You had floor plans on the presentation.
Yeah,
I just wonder whether it's easier.
There, but
for everyone to see.
Do you have them?
I just have the rear elevation.
Oh, right.
Whatever floor plans
Okay.
and the light show.
But
Visual, vision.
yeah.
So five units. So 4 of them are dual aspect and 1 is thing like that.
I'll ask the objectives about that. Thank you for that. So moving on to Mr. Tazen, you raised about the other 5 neighbourhood plan for deferment, and the reason presumably would be that you want to match that the codes against the development. Imagine if there was a deferment and following the examination, if the development suit or under the threshold of the neighbourhood plan, would you be accepting the application with your objectives?
So I think
Obviously, I think there's an examination needed. Otherwise, you wouldn't ask for the deferment. Yeah.
So I think we would need to review the revised plan. If we look at the pre-application, even the advice then was 4 stories. What's been done here is replication of Unit 10, and we've got 2 floors of commercial space, and then maximising the units. Now, there is no real need for 2 floors of commercial units, so we can achieve 4 stories and have it be commercially viable. So, based on what the revised plan is, there's an opportunity that we will support it. So we'll need to see what that looks like.
Any comment from Albert? Just on that question about imagine there was a deferment or examination based on the other file, which we will obviously have from the officers. That's something that you would be willing to accept all?
Well, I mean, as Luke said, I think we are still compliant, but if it says that we have to amend it, then I'm guessing we would have no option to. But as Luke said, I think we are compliant, and we are supported in the local plan and the design guide.
I don't think the policy, even if you left here, we all left here, and we had to re-examine the policy. Be back in a month's time, presenting exactly the same scheme with some further justification. But that's what it would do. It wouldn't, a review of that policy wouldn't change the scheme. And just to pick up the point, 2 floors of commercial, the policy, we can't lose commercial floor, existing commercial floor space. So we have to provide the commercial floor space that's provided in the scheme.
And do you need 2 floors of it?
That's the only way you can provide it. That's the only way you can. There's 340 square meters existing. We're providing 370 square meters just because that's how it fits across 2 floors. One floor, there'd be a reduction in commercial floor space, and we'd be against your planned policy. So we have to do it.
Gentlemen, next question.
Yes.
You heard from objective units, but the 36% reduction in the daylight. Are you saying from your earlier answer to one of the panel member, is you calculate based on cumulative space as opposed to one single unit against? So one would be on disadvantages with that.
So it's absolutely. So it's assessed as 9 and 10 together, and that's the cumulative impact that's in the report on the neighbouring.
I'm going to have to cross verify with the officer, but yeah, go on.
First of all, that they're not taking into consideration any basements, of which there are lots of working basements of opposite buildings. So the light study should also be considered from the rear basement central for opposite buildings. There are buildings along Latimer Road that are solely basement, not living homes that have a basement but solely basement, and those have to be taken into consideration, and they weren't taken into consideration. I have a basement, next to me has a basement, the pub has a basement. Moving further on, the homes on this block all have basements. The other thing, if I could also say, if this is an accurate mock-up of what will be, there is currently at the Playground Theatre a forward front that is not necessarily agreed, and it's come further forward with some sitting out area. This building here now, as you can see from that, comes even further forward. So there is no green space, there is nothing. And the window fenestras, you can see from the side, are all coming even further into pavement space. So if that is a proper mock-up of what it's supposed to look like opposite, I would challenge even the current light study in its isolation away from Unit 10, whether it is indeed correct, because that building has come forward, I would estimate, about 3 meters of the footprint of where it should be set back.
Would you like to put that?
Yeah,
to the applicant?
I mean, it does a little bit like that. But the front of the building line is in line with the existing unit, not in line with the Playground Theatre's extension. So we won't be pushing any further out into this over pavement. The only bit that does push out a bit is the recessed section. It pushes slightly into the loading bay, which is there currently. But no, we don't encroach any further than the existing building.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom, I think last question.
Thanks, Chair. Just had a question for the applicant about noise, and particularly on the rear of the site. And so we heard reference to the reflected sound from the railway. That's already quite loud, and this can make it louder. I wonder what you've done to look into that, potentially mitigate it. And I know you can't be held responsible for the building out the whole road. I can imagine a situation where no one's responsible for the building out the whole road, and the combined effect of all of them has quite a big impact on noise reverberation. So that's the first question. Second one, also on noise, because we had ventilation mentioned. Could you talk about the likely noise from your ventilation, and again, any mitigation measures and how loud that's likely to be? Thank you.
So we did have an acoustic survey done, and the most prominent noise was the railway line, but it didn't suggest that it was going to be an impactful issue that should drastically alter the scheme. We proposed the inside to have insulated glazing to reduce any noise. But it's also worth noting that there are gaps between the buildings. There will be a gap. There is a gap between ours and the theatre. There's a gap on the other side between 10 and 11. So it is broken up. It won't be a sheer face. And sorry, what's the second question?
So ventilation.
Oh, ventilation. Yeah, all our plants.
All plants.
Yeah, all our plant is actually within the 55 stories, so it won't go higher than that proposal. It's in an enclosed area right in the centre of the building, including enclosed back. So noise from that will not.
I think it should be inaudible for the people on the other side of the railway line.
So any whatever the commercial units turn out to be, designed to run through rises that go up through the building, and then are dealt within that acoustically treated enclosure on the top.
Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So if you return to your seats, that would be good. Thank you. Our opportunity to ask officers questions. So, Anne, you
I'll
go
start
first.
with a few questions.
Yeah.
First question that I wanted to ask about is about the unit next door, so unit 10. And I understand from what I've read in the papers that this was refused by the refused one, and then it went to the inspector. Is that correct?
I think that's unit 11.
11. Sorry, unit
Yeah.
11.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one next door.
Yeah.
Is that right? It was
Yes.
refused, and then on a. Can you just tell us a bit about what? Because I'm looking for it. I read it, but now I can't
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah,
Because
so
I think it's quite important to understand what we've heard from the inspector. And I did see some comments about the height, so that's what I'm particularly interested in.
yeah, so looking at unit 11, it was refused on the basis of its sort of vertical emphasis and its commercial character. So whilst it was a taller building with the same height, 4 stories, it was refused basically on the detailed design of the building, which exaggerated its height. And the majority of the proposed materials in that situation were considered to be sort of alien to the surrounding landscape, which contributed to those reasons for refusal. Don't have the inspector's decision up with us at the moment. I can dig that, try and dig that out. But essentially, it was more of the detailed design which added to the verticality of the building, which is why officers used it in that instance. But it is sort of a consideration when determining applications along the wider street, but we sort of assess each application on its own merits.
Sure, but if comments were made about the height, I think it's important that we know what those are. And I saw it somewhere. I just can't find it right now.
Sorry, is that unit 10? That's the
Yes.
unit 9
Yeah.
we can see, so we can't see unit 11.
No, unit 11's further down. So the one next to it is unit 8, the lower industrial unit, and then you've got the proposal middle and your unit 10.
Yeah, I've got the planning inspector's report is that top.
Thanks. Okay.
So I guess just on these sort of contradictions that we've been hearing a little bit about, people have a different opinion on LR5 and and the council's design code.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just struggling to understand why there's such a difference in opinion in terms of compliance. Can you talk to us a little bit about LR5 and its where it features in the hierarchy?
Yeah.
And also on the design code, and this point that's been raised about it refers to 4-storey buildings, but not 5.
So sort of the starting point for determining a planning application is sort of the NPPF, so the National Planning Policy Framework, which states that sort of planning application should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. So underneath the NPPF, you then have the London plan, and underneath that, you then have the local plan, and then you have the St Quintin's neighbourhood plan, which sits beneath the local plan. So it is a material consideration, and we do take it into account. But sort of the overriding framework is the NPPF, and that's where we sort of start from before working our way down. In terms of LR5, it's referred to in a table 5.1 of the officer's report, so it has been taken into consideration. It's not specifically referred to in the living conditions. So I'll have to explain to people.
Yeah. Okay, so you're saying that the design code and the LR5 is the lowest considerations out of that hierarchy?
Yeah, so the design code's sort of an SVD, so it doesn't form part of the local sort of development plan as a whole, but it is a consideration, but it's not sort of as strong a consideration as the local plan would perhaps be. We have to kind of consider the housing policies and the public benefits which do arise as a result of the proposals.
There's no legal obligation.
And what, sorry, just the last bit of that question is, why do we have this apparent discrepancy between the local plan and the neighbourhood plan?
Just to confirm, the gentleman, the contributor earlier on was absolutely correct that the neighbourhood plan does form part of our development plan, and Gabby's correctly identified that our consideration is of the development plan as a whole. So the development plan has various component parts, which include the London plan, the local plan, and the neighbourhood plan. So the gentleman's contribution was correct, and the officer report does clearly give reference to that neighbourhood plan throughout the report, with specific reference to policy LR5 at 520, and also at the table that Gabby's referenced. So we as an officer group, we as the local planning authority must give that consideration, and including the reference to the NPPF, which is a material consideration, and other material considerations. I think Mr. Emerton also made a contribution in advising that the consideration is as a whole. So we do need to give consideration to it as a whole, and the conformity point that Mr. Emerton made was that the neighbourhood plan would not have been approved had it not been in conformity with the local plan. So I'm satisfied from a legal perspective because the gentleman made reference to potential launch of a request for judicial review of the council's determination should it resolve to grant that planning permission based on what he perceives to be a failure of reference to the neighbourhood plan. But I think it's very clear throughout the report that it has been given very careful consideration as part of the assessment. So I sit comfortably in response to that point that was made, and respect that contribution, sir.
Just because I think this is slightly the crux of the matter here, what does it say about 5 stories?
Well, I think we also need to be clear. So you can, I'll defer to officers to give you the exact wording. I've also got the St Quintin's document in front of me, so I can give you verbatim. But we need to also be clear that we are looking at the development plan as a whole, and in terms of being prescriptive, we are able, in terms of material considerations, to take into account, for example, the context of the site and other matters. So we're looking at as reference has been made to the street as a whole, to the context, to the relationship with adjacent buildings, for example. Reference was made to overlooking. The images that were provided in the presentation provide clarity on the question that was asked earlier about direct overlooking. There was an image, I'm going to hold up my paper to save you looking through it, but it shows clearly exactly what it's overlooking. There it is on the screen.
The cul-de-sac.
Yeah, in terms of your direct question of impact on the homes of the objectors living directly opposite. So there is a contextual issue. There is a need to consider the local plan as a whole, and that local plan includes, as I say, the development plan, I apologise, comprises of those component parts.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to advise in terms of being overly prescriptive. We do need to consider the context and the exact.
So I think what you're saying is if it wasn't opposite that cul-de-sac, it might have a different judgment.
What I am saying is that we need to look at the context of the site, its proximity to other people's homes. For example, the contribution that was made from the gentleman that lives to the rear. And thank you for your contribution, sir. When we look at those, for example, we look at the property itself, we look at the length of your garden, the fact that between the back of your property and the proposal, we've got your garden, we've got a green strip, we've then got a railway corridor which sits on top of an embankment, we've got a further green strip, then another safeguarded area, and then their building. So there are aspects to the context that we need to consider, and I think the officer's report does give clarity on that in terms of looking at those component parts. If I were to singularly listen to the contributions, it could be construed that the building is nearer than it actually is physically. And similarly with the contributions earlier, I find this image, whilst it's been confirmed that that does misleadingly give an appearance of it being more forward than it is, it doesn't actually sit over the homes of any resident as a sensitive receptor.
Thank you. And did you have any
No, well, I do have another question, but maybe
something
a little bit different.
Okay, Aaron.
I just have a follow-up. So, Amanda, you're saying directly opposite, why was the neighbouring development agreed if there was a building directly opposite?
I'm not able to respond to a question as to why the neighbouring property was agreed. That would have been a decision of this committee, and as an officer, I wouldn't question that decision that was made. My consideration this evening is on the development that's before us, and I'm happy to take questions on that to assist you in making your decision this evening.
Right. So if there was a property, imagine there was no cul-de-sac road or the highway, and there's a property down there, would the 5-story be against the LR5 and the local plan?
I'm not able to imagine a hypothetical situation because that's not the situation before us. I'm singularly and factually looking at the situation before us, and it is as depicted in that image, where because of that gap, there is a much reduced harm in terms of overlooking and the other negative issues that have been discussed this evening.
All right, thank you.
I've got a couple of quick points I just wanted to make sure understood. First of all, and I have seen some of the comments that say actually there's more commercial space here than actually really would ever be needed and would be viable and things like that. I assume the reason why we've got the 2 floors and the 2 floors of the heights that we're talking about is because our policies say that it's employment and that's the basis. That's where that comes from. So in a sense, a bit like the balconies, we have said in our own development plan that these things are required. I think actually further balconies come in the London plan as well.
Yeah.
But I just want to make certain that I've got that right. The other issue is a technical one about daylight sunlight. So I think daylight sunlight studies look at all the sort of windows that potentially might be affected. So, for example, if somebody lives in a basement, which has been cited, then a basement window. I mean, it might be a window that didn't have a great deal of light anyway, but that would be part of the daylight assessment process, wouldn't it?
Right, so all the windows opposite the development would be assessed as part of the RE daylight sunlight system.
Right.
And on your former comment, Chairman.
Yes, that's right.
You were correct. In your reference to commercial floor space, you were correct.
Yes. So in other words, the what might well be a very sensible everyday conversation to say, well, we reduce the height of this building because we'll just get rid of some of the commercial space, which we have a question mark about. In terms of planning policies and our decision making, unfortunately, that's a non-starter. Or we can't do that.
Yeah.
And on the balconies issue, I mean, in an ideal world, I'm not all that keen on these sort of balconies. That, I mean, if we really wanted to, and I'm not sure, it may be that we actually don't have a strong view on it, but could they be removed or restricted in some way, or is that not really?
You probably wouldn't be able to condition the restriction of the balconies because they'd be on the approved drawings and there'd be doors accessing onto them.
Yes.
And we wouldn't be able to.
And the argument there would be that we would in effect be saying this is redesigning the building, which we can't do. We can only, I mean, and I think this can apply for deferral of things. You have to defer for a reason. You can kind of change things by condition, but only in a way that's very limited in relation to the nature of the development.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
right.
yes. Okay, thanks very much indeed for that, Tom. Toby, sorry. Well, we're talking about this is rather daylight sunlight. This is lines of sight. But is there anything that you?
You're always on the end. That's fine. Yeah. I mean, it's starting to get into it. I mean, my questions work really well. I'm trying to find something in the design code. I'm about balconies, about balconies. What I asked the applicants was that there's some reference to I can't find it. That's why I'm tapping whatever you. I mean, what does the design code say about? I mean, don't give me the whole thing, but is there a relevant section? Because I've just
Yes, so it's page 28 of the design code. It does set out some information on the primary frontage and that sort of balconies contribute to a cluttered appearance at the front elevation of the building, and sort of to avoid overlooking to neighbouring properties. But I would remind members that it's the design code guidance, and to refer back to the local plan policy CD9, which relates sort of specifically to the impact on living conditions. And the preamble in that, the text of that policy states that sort of a reasonable distance for overlooking would be approximately 18 metres. And in this particular proposal, I refer members back to paragraph 6.80 of the officer's report, which focuses on overlooking, and that the neighbouring properties opposite would be approximately 21 metres away from the site, so this be within that reasonable distance for overlooking, as defined by the policy.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Okay, sure. So, other quick ones. I know the street just told us that just confirmed that it's not coming out as far as it looks like in the drawing. Why does it look like it does in the drawing theory.
I think sometimes visualizations in the 3D models can sometimes maybe be a bit misleading. When looking at sort of the proposed floor plans, the projecting bays at the front
Sure.
come out of it, but
And my last question really is, I get concerned about cumulative impact. What counts, what doesn't? Obviously we don't have a policy, sort of intensification policy in this moment. What can be considered part of the cumulative impact or not? Because there's reference to the neighbouring units and all of that. And this is more of a sort of, legal question, like what do we base our decisions on? Because again, there's also precedent, there's also the rejected, previous applications in the area. And I mean, it seems material to me, but if we're not, you have to be directed not to accept it, then, I'd like to know. Do you understand my
yeah, so
confusion?
are you asking sort of about the cumulative impact of all the units came forward?
Yeah, and then yes, exactly. Like, because that's the thing, we're looking at a lot. I mean, by the way, I also think that's somewhat open to interpretation. I don't think the fact that you've got a neighbouring building that's also big, I don't think that means it's good that you have another one that's big. I don't think that's not my takeaway from that. But I just want to really know what we can, what we can't actually in theory consider in this decision.
Yeah, so you can consider the planning history of the neighbouring units as part of determining the application, but also the units number 1 to 14 have been identified as sort of an area for regeneration in this particular location, which is obviously led to officers when we've said the principle of the demolition and its redevelopment would be acceptable.
Okay. And what if you don't mind one more little follow-up on that. This is just in terms of your sort of anticipating the local plan policy, and in my experience, it's sort of tough luck on me really. It's just my preference when it comes to this sort of thing is not that just any homes being created justifies any. My feeling is it depends a lot what kind of homes they are and who they're serving, and that has to be weighed against the impact on neighbours and all of that stuff. Is there anything actually in the plan that can be interpreted in such a way as to support, my interpretation of it, if you like? Does that make sense?
Yes.
I mean, if it's no, it's no.
I mean, you're correct in that you can take everything into consideration, whether it's the housing mix, the design, impact and living conditions as part of your assessment of the proposals when determining the application. So those are all material considerations which you can take into consideration when you assess it, if that makes sense.
Right.
That's what you asked.
So I mean, really, it's that yes. I mean, providing homes, any kind of homes, versus like I don't think we need any kind of homes in the borough. I think we need certain type of homes to serve certain demographics.
Yeah.
So that's really what I'm trying to drive at.
We've taken the view that the mix of the homes is appropriate in this particular case, and sort of the
And
additional-
is that based on floor space or units or amount of people, houses or what? Bedrooms?
everything, including sort of the need as well for housing delivery.
Okay.
We're looking at the quality of those homes,
Right.
so that whoever lives in them is able to enjoy good quality of accommodation. So, for example, reference to the balconies, that adds the amenity of those occupiers, enabling them to have an outdoor space that they can enjoy. So we're looking at the quality of the homes as well as the design in terms of aesthetic.
Okay, I got you. I just wonder if it's a bit audible, frankly, but that's another question. Okay, I'll take it.
Thank you. Anne and then Tom.
So thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple more questions about the balcony and the light, the survey about the light. So on the balconies, I mean, I think this picture is helpful because it does show what's exactly in front of the building, but notwithstanding that, there are residential homes very, very close by. And we did hear from the objector about terraces overlooking bedrooms. And I must say, there's a lot of terraces on the front of this building. And I've seen other applications which we've discussed where committees have been really concerned about this type of overlooking. And it's often not the actual overlooking, it's the feeling that, you know, somebody's able to see you. So what would your comment on that be? Because you talk about 18 metres, this is 20. It feels like there's a lot of overlooking here to me. I mean, I take your point, it's really about exactly in front of it, but there are residential buildings to the side.
Yeah. It's a London street. So, I mean, if we were to look at the OS plan that's provided in front of your pack, at Highlever Road, for example, you've got properties on a typical London street that look onto one another. You know, we've got homes on both sides of the road. The situation here is that there are no homes on one side of the road, and this proposal looks to introduce them. So I completely understand, and we understand as an officer group, that will be an alien feature that the existing residents haven't previously been exposed to, because they've not had a situation of having a property opposite them and windows opposite them. However, it is common across London in terms of the, you know, the urban vernacular to have homes on either side of the street where there's, in this case, the width of the carriageway, the width of the pavement, and then the defensible space, and then the buildings. And, you know, in terms of looking at this, the distance between the two windows, those that face one another, is considered to be acceptable. When you consider what would be a reasonable distance from one window to another. I'm sure if we were to walk down any street, including the ones that we're looking at outside of this window, it would not feel unusual or alien for you to be inside one of those rooms and be aware that there is a property on the other side of the street.
I'm sure that's absolutely correct. But I guess I'm asking about the terraces, just because I think there's a lot of terraces on this building, and I think we do all accept the London, you know, it's all very tight, particularly in Kensington. We all know that. But I'm not sure I can remember a situation where we've had a application where there are so many terraces creating new opportunities to overlook, and I guess that's what's worrying me.
Yeah, we've given those consideration. Obviously, the ground and first floor are not part of this because they're commercial. So it seems that your line of question is focused on the balcony amenity space. Yes, there will be a new introduction. Yes, there will be an opportunity for people to be outside utilising those spaces, enjoying that new formed amenity. The question for this committee is whether or not it considers the existence of those amenity spaces for those new occupants to be so harmful as to warrant refusal of the application. That's a question for this committee this evening. Officers have considered that and have resolved that it is acceptable in this context. But obviously it's within this committee's right to take a view.
Yeah, it's really helpful, thank you. And then on the BRE, the light assessment that was done, and the issue of the 36%, and whether that fits within guidelines or not. So I'm confused, I have to admit, because I hear 20%, I've heard 25%, this is 36%. Could you just explain it so I can understand whether 36 is over what we would find acceptable?
I would say first it's guidance. So, you know, you do in terms of our decision making, got the development plan, and this is guidance, the BRE. The applicant has submitted a statement that demonstrates what the impact would be, including, you know, with reference to cumulative. And our consideration of the percentages that presented demonstrate to us that there is an indication of change, and those percentages are referenced in the report. But those indications of change are, again, in terms of the considerations of ours, are not sufficient to warrant consideration of refusal to grant planning permission. So what we're not saying that there is no change. Absolutely, there will be an impact, and we've been very clear and transparent about that in our report. It's the degree of impact, and we've landed as an officer group on a recommendation that degree of impact is not sufficient to warrant refusal to grant planning permission. I think the illustrations are really helpful in this presentation and shows the context in terms of the distance between buildings. And I think that's a really helpful indication of what the end product would look like.
It's a wide street. I would say it's a wider street than many. Yeah, there's balconies. There's a lot of them. A lot of balconies.
John, just a very quick one. Thank you, Chair. It's just going back to the point of new housing. And I just want to sort of clarify the weight which we give to delivery of 7 new homes in the planning balance. I know it's not an exact science, but you know, we weigh up a number of things, and we might think things are sort of slightly on the edge of what the development policy allows. But then, what weight do we give to the delivery of those seven new homes?
We give significant weight to the delivery of new homes in the borough. So it would align with our housing policies.
So, sort of one of the most in your report is one of the most sort of substantial considerations.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Arian, last question.
Yeah, in terms of the passive floor space, which is commercial, the hours of operation would be not 24 hours. I mean, based on
there was a report. Yeah, there's condition 22, which states the operating time, saying that commercial units would only be permitted to operate between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. on any day.
and PM.
Yeah.
And policy to maintain and sustain the passive floor space is, unless there's a local change in the local plan, they will remain as passive.
Important, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so well, thank you very much indeed. So we have to, we have to make a decision here. I think perhaps the planning balance slide is a good one to have up in front of us. I mean, personally, I think and we had a very detailed discussion about matters this evening. I think actually what Councillor Bennett just said a moment or two ago, I think probably needs to be the right approach, in the sense that the new homes is something which we have to give considerable weight to and benefit. I think the exact size and the number of bedrooms and things, I think to my mind it's quite clear that they fall very, very comfortably within the sort of parameters of the local plan for this area. In terms of design and heritage, well, it's unusual to meet people who think that modern buildings they naturally think that they look wonderful, to be honest, but the buildings that are proposed here, they are modern, and again, I think we have to accept that they fall very comfortably within sort of what would have to be viewed as acceptable design. I think in terms of the height issue, I think we have to recognise that I think the granted permission for Unit 10, which is immediately next door. I think that's probably quite a non-balanced decision, but it does have permission, and it has to be a material consideration for us. And the proposal here is is in line with the height of that building that has permission immediately next door. In terms of living conditions, which of course includes the daylight sunlight aspects, I think they have to be considered acceptable. The daylight sunlight calculations, the guidelines are set out in a great deal of detail about how these things are done. And I think, as the director has said, they are only guidelines, but I think in this particular case, they need to be considered to be again thinking of consistency of planning decisions, that they are well within the parameters of things that would need to be considered acceptable. So that's, I think, probably, I think on balance, I mean, it's entirely understandable. People who've got used to these rather low-lying, perhaps many of them rather underused buildings across the road, and now there are these considerably more substantial buildings that are coming forward. I think that's something that I think I can understand would be unwelcome. But I think overall, on balance, I think the application probably needs to be considered as acceptable. But it's over to all of us to make a decision. I don't know who wants to go to who's.
Yeah, well, I know I sort of broadly sort of agree with the points you made, Chair. I think I'm sort of thinking of my flat, as I think we sort of often do on cases, and I face on to building a sort of similar distance with lots of terraces, etc. I've always sort of never thought of it as anything more than normal city living, but I can completely understand if when I moved in it was sort of one story and someone built it up to 5 stories, I might have a different opinion of that. So I totally understand where the objectors are coming from on that. But I think it's sort of within, perhaps sort of on the edge of sort of what's supported within the plan, as we've discussed at length. But then I really sort of go back to the point of the 7 new homes. And so I made this point before at previous committees, but the people who aren't here today, the seven new families who will live in those homes. And so obviously we don't know who they are and who they might be, and so they can't represent themselves. But I do think it's incumbent on us as a planning committee in a borough with a shortage of homes and a country with sort of a housing shortage to think of those. And I do sort of weigh that very highly in the planning balance. And so sort of taking all that into account, I sort of agree with the comments you made, but I think overall it is an acceptable problem.
Okay. Thank you. Would like to go next? Jody.
Yeah, I mean, it probably won't surprise you that I disagree. I mean, for one thing, I mean, the 7 homes, the people that will live there. I mean, honestly, in my opinion, they can afford to live anywhere. This is not the people that we need to be worried about in terms of their housing. This is the point of, this is what maybe should be more explicit in the local plan, isn't. Again, we're up against policy that I can't touch. But and it certainly doesn't really outweigh for me the encroachment, even if it is within guidelines, just over some guidelines, under some. There's an element of interpretation involved. I just don't think that's worth that's worth the effect on living conditions of neighbours. And I also think that there is, and I keep saying this, cumulative impact. We don't have explicit policies about cumulative impact, but I've just seen a lot in North Kent specifically, where there's a lot of development and the creation of new homes, which, as I say, people who live there, are not who I think we need to be worried about housing in this borough. And so we keep pushing back in terms of light, in terms of air quality, all of these things. So, I do appreciate there's an element of interpretation. I just don't see these types of homes as being quite decisive, as said in the borderland. And I don't really think that the neighbours should have to be impacted by it.
I'm happy to make some comments. I mean, I broadly agree with most of the things that you said. The new homes. I mean, this is obviously an area where we do want development, we do want investment. We welcome all of that. I think the position of the units opposite the cul-de-sac does make a difference in terms of the height and what you can do there. But I'm afraid I have to agree with Councillor Benton. I think the impact on living conditions because of the balconies is too much. And I think you could have a similar scheme which didn't impact the residents to that extent. And I think we all have to live together. We all have to make things work together. And I feel there's just been too much asked from the neighbours with 3 floors of almost wall-to-wall balconies here. And if you look at unit 1, it has some low-level balconies, but nothing like this. So I think the impact on living conditions, it's unreasonable, and it doesn't have to be like that to achieve some of the other things that we want to achieve.
I think that the issue about the balconies is that they are something which it's demanded by planning policy. I think is the issue. I mean, I agree with you actually. If we were just having a normal conversation, do we like balconies that are always put on these sort of buildings that come forward as proposals to planning committees? I agree with you, but they're not merely dealers compliant. They are supported by policies.
These are wall-to-wall balconies. There's a lot of balconies here, I think it's.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's noisy. It's overlooking. I just think more consideration could have been given to the living conditions of. Look, it's my view, but I think more consideration could have been given that there's a lot of demands on local people with the height, it's a big building, which I think is probably fine in most contexts, but it's got to be done with some sensitivity, and I think there's a lot of impact here.
I think what Councillor Surrey said better than I did. It's just a better alternative. They could do something a little bit less impact, and you still be doing the things they need to do. Doesn't necessarily need to be, in my view. You don't need to put the kibosh on the whole thing. It could be more reasonable, and it could serve residents better than the current.
Chairman, I think you looked at the neighbouring property which has the same height. So for me, height wouldn't be an issue. The issue would be what Councillor Siren and Mr. Benton just spoke about, the balconies, which would sort of cause problems in terms of privacy or overlook. I think that's the main consideration. In terms of the height. Acceptable because you've got other buildings which just been improved.
Yes, it's not exactly.
Windows too, I think, as well as balconies.
Yeah.
So the thing, if it was a window, if you built out those balconies, and then had a window, you have arguably, okay, maybe you're not as visible to people opposite. Arguably, you have equal opportunity to overlook.
But you could have many people on these balconies all at the same time making noise and all.
And have many people inside an apartment looking for a window.
But it's much easier to overlook people when you're outside in this context. So, but all I'm saying is, I think there has to be give and take, and I think this could be achieved in a way that is not as impactful as it is. Notwithstanding all the comments that both of you have made about the homes, and obviously we welcome the development. Everyone welcomes the development and investment in this road, but it just there's a big impact, I think.
All right. Well, I think we need to make a decision. So we need to take a vote. So the recommendation, which is set out in the report, recommendation is to grant, with of course a legal agreement relating to parking and that sort of thing. So can I see those in favour of the recommendation to grant? Can I see those against? So the recommendation is not adopted. Okay, thank you. So we have to try and think of a reason for refusal, which would have to be a resolution to refuse. All right, I'm going to resist the temptation of inviting the officers to say over to you. So I'm going to have a go myself at this first. I think that we are saying that in the context, we consider that the design, because of the massing of the building combined with the balconies, we are saying that is something that taken together is unacceptable, contrary to obviously policies that refer to that. I think the living conditions on neighbouring properties, I think we, I have to be honest about this. We are pushing at the absolute limit of anything that I think could possibly be considered a proper reason, actually, to do this. But I think that would be where I think we have to go. Well, because I'll bring Amanda Rees in a second. I think because of the distance of the street, the width of the street, I think, and the nature of the daylight sunlight work that's been done, I think that the distance, principally, the balconies, the balcony issue, I think is it's a struggle because the street is quite wide, and you have to accept that a huge number of people in the borough live where there are buildings that are much closer than 20 metres away, and there's often small terraces or outside spaces that are close by.
We'll be relitigating.
I think it's important we think about what might be happening in the rest of the street.
Well, I'm going to
look, I know we're here to talk about this, but we do have to also think that if it's everybody can have a massive balcony, I'm not sure that's particularly what we want to.
Let's us keep it. So I've had a go at thinking of what a resolution to refuse might be. Amanda, did you want to? What do you suggest might be the best formulation for this?
From listening to the debate and turning up my contemporaneous notes of what was just taken, and perhaps Douglas could confirm in his note also, the words that were spoken by Councillor Siren were that it was the impact of the living conditions because of the balconies was the substantive point. So I'm setting aside the latter reference to massing. So that it sounds to me as though the vote in terms of the 3 to refuse was based on a reason of the development being unacceptable by reason of the harm generated as a result of the existence of the balconies on the front elevation. A contribution's just been made from the gallery, but your debate has not included reference to the rear elevation. So I pause there through the chairman and invite you to continue your debate and conclude on your reason for refusal.
Are there any other? So that's a reason for refusal. Are there any other reasons that we could reference, that we could add, that might be the second reason for refusal? Or do you think that we really that is essentially what we have to say?
Well, for me, it's about impact on living conditions.
Well, that's
what it.
I'm literally just listening to the committee and looking to make sure that any written representation of what you said is actually reflective of your meaning. So, I mean, I'm acting as an officer. My responsibility here is to provide you with as much information as possible to take an informed view, not to sway you in any way other than to provide you with clarity on the proposal. So that's my contemporaneous note in terms of impact of the living conditions because of balconies. And in listening to the debate, it's been in reference to those on the fronting onto those properties on that
front. Look, I recognise there's going to be impacts, but the impact that concerns me is the front, the noise, the overlooking. There are residential homes there. And think if this building was there and somebody came and said, I want to put all these balconies on it, would say no. We wouldn't allow it.
That clarification is helpful. So it sounds as though, and I'm deferring to my legal colleague to act as my critical friend in terms of whether or not I'm correct in what I'm saying. It sounds as though, and I'm seeking your confirmation through the chairman, that this committee is resolving to refuse to grant planning permission due to the impact of the existence of the balconies on the front elevation fronting onto Latimer, due to the possible noise and overlooking that gets generated from those balconies. We obviously, I would seek delegated authority from this committee to provide a stronger set of wording that is enforceable in terms of being a proper reason for refusal, but in substance, the spirit of it sounds as though that is an
I think the committee's I think the committee has been quite clear in terms of what its overall feeling is, but I think so. The way we need to do this is that we need to have a resolution to refuse permission on the basis of that reason which the director has outlined, and which the officer team will finalise the exact word and put that in the correct form.
I just put one sentence in. I think from how I would describe it as is that the impact of the balconies overlooking loss of light that exist, while being within certain frameworks, are not sufficiently counted by the provision of the homes that are suggested, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we debate is whether or not the homes, and in my opinion,
so we perhaps.
But also for us to be delivered without that level of impact.
So if officers, hopefully you got that and you can formulate the wording and the correct wording. So can I see a proposer of that motion out of Councillor Sarah and a seconder, Councillor Burnton? So can I see those in favour of a resolution to refuse along the lines, exactly the lines that we've discussed? Can I see those in favour of that resolution? Can I see those against? So the resolution is adopted. Good. Well, thank you very much indeed. And in particular, thank you for bearing with us while we did that and a lot of back and forth. Thank you very much indeed. That concludes our meeting. Oh, actually, sorry, just before we, sorry, well, if you could just bear with me a moment, please, ladies and gentlemen, just very quickly. Sorry, apologies. Very quickly. Very quickly, the council's AGM is in a few weeks' time, and as the a very esteemed mayor secretary used to use terminology, word has reached me, and in fact, Councillor Tom Bennett, I think my understanding is that he's going to lead this committee. And may indeed be proposed as the next mayor of the role at the council AGM. So I would certainly hope that we would all thank Tom for his work on the committee separately. And obviously subject to the election of the AGM. Which we can't obviously predetermine, that you will enjoy a fine mayoralty. And I understand that Councillor Aretti, Arian, you may well also acquire a position within the mayoralty as well. So congratulations on that as well.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for bearing with me. Sorry.